Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Wes Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And Wes, unfortunately, for the fifth Tuesday in a row, we are here to talk about a Packers loss. And honestly, this was the most distressing one. The Detroit Lions came in on a 5-game losing streak. The Packers were on a 4-game losing streak. And Green Bay's losing streak continues. 15-9 is the final score. And I guess if there's a way to sum up how this game epitomized how the last month or so of Packers football has gone, we've sat here every week and talked about missed opportunities that might have altered the course of the game. This one, it's missed opportunities that absolutely positively altered the outcome of the game because the Packers had plenty of chances to score enough points to win this one, and they simply didn't get it done.
There's a lot of times where we'll sit here, we'll talk for 22 and a half minutes or whatever it ends up being, and then we just move about our day. Honestly, Marv from the back could punch all the buttons on this thing. I could mention losing the turnover battle 3-1, going 0 for 4 in the red zone, 0 for 2 in goal to go. We could call it a day. I mean, that's ultimately what this came down to.
That was the game.
And, Mike, what was the biggest line that I reiterated? We both talked about it, but the biggest line I was pitching all last week is that they've done good things against the New York Giants. They've done good things against the New York Jets. They did good things in Washington. They did really good things late in Buffalo. But what you do in those games does not guarantee victory the following week. The strides you make in certain areas doesn't mean that those areas are going to hold up the following week. In this game, as you talked about with this 5-game losing streak, this game epitomized all of that because Packers had 389 total yards of offense. They dominated time of possession. Third downs, they were 6 for 8 in the first half. They did all the things well except finish.
Yeah.
And in some of these other games this year, the Packers have been not as good on third downs, and then they've been able to punch the ball into the end zone. It's just that inconsistency, and it's that line that Adam Stenavich said last Thursday that has he was talking just strictly about the offensive line, about the only thing that's been consistent is inconsistency. And unfortunately for the Packers, I think as a whole through the first 9 games, that's been sort of the hallmark of this team.
Yeah, the statistic that kind of blows you away from this game is the fact that the Packers had 8 possessions that ended in Lions territory on the plus side of the 50. The only one that didn't is when the Packers took a knee at the end of the first half when they didn't have enough time to do anything. The other 8 times the Packers had the ball, they were across midfield every single time, and out of those 8 possessions, they were only able to produce 9 points. It's hard to fathom. And we don't need to go over the chapter and verse of, from the 5-yard line an interception and from the 1-yard line an interception and an interception right after the Packers defense got an interception. I mean, we all saw it. We all know what happened. There was another failed 4th down, inside the 40-yard line of Detroit when the Packers couldn't convert. So many chances, and to walk out of Ford Field with a 15-9 loss. And Aaron Rodgers said it after the game: you can't lose a game like that to that team.
Yeah.
And the Packers couldn't lose that game, but they did, and now they have to turn the page to 2 home games in a span of 5 days against a couple of teams that are right in the thick of the playoff hunt in their respective conferences, Dallas in the NFC and Tennessee in the AFC. In terms of the opponents you're facing, the gauntlet of the schedule is coming up now, and the Packers are still searching for that victory that maybe, just maybe, one win could start to turn things in another direction, but they haven't gotten it for 5 weeks.
Well, and again, it tends to be one of these things where I do the inbox on Mondays, and then we come in here on Tuesday mornings and sort of hash this thing out. And I recall something I said in inbox as well, which is I don't care about the season right now. I don't care about the playoffs. I don't care about the future. It is all about win number 4.
Yeah,
and
it's about finding a win.
I think it's been 37 days, the Packers have still been chasing that 4th win of the season. That's the emphasis right now. That's the focus. And they're going up against a really good Dallas Cowboys team this weekend. We'll preview it, later this week. But a team that, again, is coming off a bye, much like Buffalo was,
Yep.
much like the mini bye with Washington. This schedule has done the Packers no favors. There's been times where the calls have not done the Packers, the officials' calls have not done the Packers any favors.
Yep.
There's been adversity that has hit time and time again. You can probably fill up a minute block here coming up discussing all the injuries the Packers had coming out of this game against the Lions. But one of the big things that Matt LaFleur always talks about, one of his big lines is nobody's going to feel sorry for you. That's where the Packers are. They're 3-6, and when you look at this coin flip league and the amount of parity in the National Football League, there are times where you're 3-6. There's times when you're 6-3, and Aaron Rodgers touched on it after the game. The Packers won a lot of one-score games early on, especially in 19 under Matt LaFleur. And this year, those fortunes, those odds have not been in their favor so far.
Yeah, and this game once again was another example, the epitome, if you will, of the self-inflicted wounds, because the interceptions were certainly the fault of Aaron Rodgers. And as much as on defense, holding a Detroit team that had averaged nearly 36 points per game at home to 15 points. Bottom line is that was a defensive performance that should have been good enough to win the game. So as I get into some of the things that went wrong with the defense, that needs to be out there first and foremost. The defense overall played well enough to win. But some of the same types of things that we've seen in previous weeks are still hurting this Packers defense. Even though they only gave up 15 points, they had opportunities to play even better. Jair Alexander had a great interception in the game, but earlier he had a totally undisciplined, unnecessary roughness penalty that turned a 16-yard pass play into a 31-yard chunk play for the Lions, which led to a touchdown right before halftime. 3rd and 15, Keyshawn Nixon gets called for defensive holding, and instead of getting a stop right there in Detroit territory, Detroit goes on to score its other touchdown because of the reprieve there, a 5-yard penalty on 3rd and 15 that gives them an automatic first down, and the Packers can't get the stop. Late in the game, a 2nd and 20. They take a check down throw over the middle. They're just trying to get a few yards to make it 3rd and 12. And Chris Barnes gets called for a helmet hit and unfortunately then has to leave the game for a concussion evaluation. But then that 15-yard penalty extends the drive for the Lions. The Packers don't get it back then for their final drive until just a couple minutes left, as opposed to having maybe 4 or 4.5 minutes on the clock if they get a stop there off of the 2nd and 20 situation. Those are the kinds of things that continue to happen to this team in this game on both sides of the ball. And you don't need every single thing to go your way to win a game that ends up 15-9. But you can't have this many things that are nothing but your own fault, the self-inflicted kind of stuff, and expect to win. And it's what the Packers have to, as Matt LaFleur likes to say, win or lose, you have to hit the reset button. You have to start over. And that's what they'll do this week in preparing for Dallas. But some of these lessons from week to week, when things aren't changing, it's hard to know when it's going to.
Well, and this was the most probably maddening part of this thing for the Packers, was that they played well despite a lot of injuries, a lot of departures. I mean, they go into this game without Devondre Campbell, so you have a rookie in Quay Walker who's relaying the calls, the Mike linebacker. They're rotating their inside backers. Isaiah McDuffie and Chris Barnes both played there. Eric Stokes leaves with an ankle and knee injury. That forces Rasul Douglas to come in. And as you talked about with Keyshawn Nixon getting the defensive holding, well, he's in the slot because they lost Stokes. You lose, Rashawn Gary to what appears to be a season-ending knee injury.
Yeah.
Kingsley Enagbari has the only sack for Green Bay in this game, but that gets wiped out because of the way that Goff's falling. His hand makes contact with his helmet.
Yeah.
It is one of these situations where I thought in a lot of ways for the Packers defense, you get done with that game and it's 15 points. Jared Goff threw for 137 yards.
Yeah, they only had 250 some yards, I think,
Yeah.
when they'd been a, as I said, 400 yard, 30 plus point team at home throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, and Jamal Williams has 3.4 yards per carry. The guy that had 8 touchdowns, a lot of red zone finishes, wasn't able to punch in. There's just so many little things in this game where the Packers did enough to win with their defense, but they didn't get a pick six. They didn't, as much as Jair Alexander tried on his, 29-yard return off the interception that he had off Goff. Nice play. It's just been one of those kind of things. And Matt LaFleur, I thought, summed it up perfectly. When you give up 15 points, you expect to win that football game, and it just wasn't enough for Green Bay. And it just, at various points this season, it just hasn't been quite enough. So where you go from here, I think a lot of it's going to depend on what this, injury report looks like on Wednesday. It sounds like they've dodged a bullet with Aaron Jones, which is huge because during that final stretch at the end of the game, they didn't have him available.
Right.
You wonder how that potentially changes some of that 2-minute if he's there, because typically he's been the 2-minute running back. Christian Watson, thankfully, it sounds like did not suffer a concussion. That was really scary for him. I just talk about two unfortunate type scenarios that just play out in the game of football where this young man is going to catch the ball, gets the ball, and there's guys crashing on him. Unfortunately, looks like you might lose Dobbs here for a little bit. The key for Matt LaFleur, offense, defense, special teams, is they're going to need to get back in the building this week, get their confidence back after a game like that, and remind themselves that we lost to a pretty good Giants team. We lost to a pretty good Jets team that just took Buffalo to the woodshed. Washington, they lost, but they've played better, and Buffalo is Buffalo. This was the first one where I left the building, left Ford Field going, you got to beat that team.
Yeah.
And to close on my long-winded point there, Aaron Jones said it afterwards. They felt like they outplayed, Detroit. But when you lose 15-9, it is what it is. And for Dan Campbell's crew, that might have been a job-saving, performance for Campbell. You don't know right now, and just a disheartening, loss.
Yeah. Well, to crystallize or to go over all of the injuries in one fell swoop here, the bad news is that it sounds like Rashawn Gary's season is over with the knee injury, and it sounds like it could be a significant injury. It was announced as both knee and ankle injuries for second-year cornerback Eric Stokes. Matt LaFleur's update on Monday is they're still gathering some more information, running some tests there, so we'll see what the prognosis is on Stokes, but there's definitely a lot of concern there. And as you mentioned, there wasn't really a specific update provided on Romeo Doubs, but there are some outside media reports indicating that he's going to miss multiple weeks. Not a serious or necessarily season-ending injury, but something that sounds like will keep him out for multiple games. I mentioned Chris Barnes left the game for a concussion evaluation. Offensive line, we saw John Runyon leave the game, but then he came back in. David Bakhtiari left the game for a significant stretch in the second half. He came back in. So once again, a lot of things on the offensive line in flux, not a lot of certainty there as the Packers are going to return to the practice field on Wednesday. The good news on the injury side of things, as you mentioned, is Aaron Jones with his ankle injury. He was held out at the end of the game. It doesn't sound like it sounds like he avoided anything significant, and Matt LaFleur did not rule out the possibility that he might be back and be able to play this week against the Cowboys. And then Christian Watson, we saw him take another big hit after a pass reception. He was removed from the game for a concussion evaluation. It turned out it was not a concussion. It turned out he was not hit in the head. What was determined is that he actually, the brunt of the shot that he took was actually to his chest, and he staggered a little bit, or didn't look completely in control of his faculties, so to speak, because the wind was knocked out of him, but he was trying to stay on his feet instead of falling to the turf. So he cleared everything with regard to head injury or concussion concerns, but because of the concussion the previous week in Buffalo and that hit knocking the wind out of him in Detroit, he was held out for the rest of the game, the Packers taking the high side of caution there.
Can I make a quick comment about that?
Yeah.
I get a kick out of the fans' reaction to this too, because before that, we're getting all these questions in the inbox. Hey, do the Packers need to shut him down for the season? Is this a long-term concern? Matt LaFleur goes to the podium at 3 p.m. on Monday and says, yep, not a concussion, and immediately switched to, well, why wasn't he back in the game then?
Yeah.
Why didn't he play? And I want to address this because
Yeah.
it's not just about the Tua thing, although I think that's probably the best example of this. A couple things to this. One, how many times, Mike, over the years have you and I covered football games where a guy passes the initial concussion protocol
Yeah.
and then and not even comes back to the game, same situation as Watson, and then maybe a day or two later, feels some effects?
Right.
I don't want to use specific names, but I can think of a couple right now, I think, over the last few years where that happened. So you want to make sure this kid's good at this moment, the next hour, the next day, especially with what happened in Buffalo. And two, the Packers, Christian Watson was good to go. He was cleared. Everything was fine. We saw him practice this past week. He looked great. But you do, when people are asking about, do you want to be careful with him? That was the Packers being careful with him
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
that moment, making sure that this is a young man, second-round draft pick, great prospect, but also a 22-year-old kid that you got to make sure that for his decision-making, for his livelihood, he's going to be okay.
Yeah, and no matter how much he's standing there on the sideline
Yes.
talking to the medical staff saying, I'm good, put me back in, I passed everything, put me back in the game, and the Packers are like, no, we're not going to do that. They were going to take the high side of caution, even though he obviously could have been a huge factor down the stretch with the Packers getting into the red zone on the final possession of the game and throwing 4 straight incomplete passes. Of course he could have made a difference. Of course Aaron Jones could have made a difference as well. But that's not how the Packers were going to go about it. And now it's let's see where these guys are this week moving forward.
And you don't want that young man to have 3 bad hits then in 2 games. That's not
100%.
great for optics either. So
100%.
hopefully pulls through this week, is available here for this game against Dallas, because I'm telling you, Mike, if depending on what happens with Dobbs, they're not going to get Randall Cobb back this week.
Yeah.
They're going to need Christian Watson here during these next 2 months.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out here too while we're talking about injuries. I know you were in the press box in Detroit. I was actually back here at the office covering the game, live blogging the game off of TV. And but even off of the television broadcast, you could tell that Alan Lazard was absolutely gutting that game
Yes.
out on the bad shoulder. He was giving it everything he had, and quite frankly, I think the shoulder potentially played a factor in him not quite being able to haul in that 4th and 3 pass on the seam shot there that was initially ruled a catch. Replay obviously showed that the ball scraped the ground, so it was ruled incomplete and a turnover on downs. He did catch the Packers' only touchdown pass of the game. Al Lazard absolutely gutted it out in that game,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to say that because for all of the injuries and everything, and the list as we've gone through, it got ridiculous in this game, and over the course of this season, it's gotten ridiculous, and you just wonder, like, when are, how many more times are these hits just going to keep coming in the health department? But hopefully at some point here, the Packers are going to start to look like a healthier team.
And watching Allen, I know there was one instance where he left quickly, went and talked to the training staff early on, came back, he was fine. But he played 65 of the 74 snaps, and I think I basically had my eyes glued on to every single time he went to the sideline. And I would say if there was 9 plays he didn't play, at least 8 of them, it wasn't that he was just going to the sideline like sitting there waiting to go back in. It was him like on one knee with water, getting himself back. I mean, that guy, 88% of the snaps. I mean, shoulder, everything. I mean, he put it all out there. 4 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. The Green Bay Packers needed him.
Yeah, no question about it. A little bit of sponsor business here, Wes. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50 years of better. All right, taking a look at other things that happened around Week 9 in the NFL. You mentioned we don't have the next opponent to talk about their most recent game because the Cowboys were on a bye week. We had talked last Thursday in previewing Week 9 about the Jets against Buffalo and whether some sort of a statement might be made there by the New York Jets, who are adjusting to life without Breece Hall, their star young running back. And lo and behold, the Jets came from behind late in the game to knock off the Buffalo Bills. And suddenly the AFC East is really anybody's division to win, with Buffalo now taking a second loss on the year. The Minnesota Vikings, they win their 6th consecutive one-score game. They are now 7-1. And I'll say this: I give a lot of credit for what the Vikings have done. Kevin O'Connell, the culture that he's obviously trying to build and create there. What the Vikings are doing is so reminiscent to me of Matt LaFleur's first season here in Green Bay in 2019, Kevin O'Connell's first season in Green Bay or in Minnesota in 2022. It's so similar. It's winning the close games, and it's doing so by consistently, weekly, game after game, being the better team in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
That was the definition of the Green Bay Packers in 2019. They ended up a 13-win team. That was not a juggernaut by any means, because they didn't blow out and dominate people. But the Green Bay Packers in 2019 were the better team in the fourth quarter almost every single week along the way to those 13 wins, and that is exactly what the Minnesota Vikings are doing, and the culture that Kevin O'Connell is creating early on in his tenure in Minneapolis.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I look at this game, and Dalvin Cook had 17 carries for 47 yards. Alexander Madison, 2 carries for 1 yard. This game ultimately, kind of at the end, went on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins. And Cousins is a really interesting quarterback because he's had these moments. I know people talked about the primetime games for a while and things, but when he's locked in, and especially with the bond and chemistry he's formed with Justin Jefferson, and being able to make quick utilization of T.J. Hawkinson in this game, he can win you ball games, and he can win you ball games late. And I think that whatever this relationship is with O'Connell, or whatever they've kind of hit on here, it's worked. And it will be really interesting to see them face an elite, well above 500 team here at some point. But the other thing about that 2019 season is the Packers were coming off a pretty bad 2018 season. The schedule allows you to see some of that, what people would perceive to be lesser competition.
Yeah.
That's the position the Vikings have been in this season, and they've made the most of it while beating the teams that I think earlier in the season you maybe not necessarily had them pinned down to beat.
Yeah, and interestingly, we'll see as this week develops, because you mentioned Minnesota facing, what will happen when they face one of the elite teams in the league
with their quarterback.
Their only loss is to the Philadelphia Eagles, who are the only undefeated team in the league, and now they are getting ready to face the Buffalo Bills this week. But there are all kinds of questions about Josh Allen and his elbow, and whether he will be able to play or not, or will he be at full strength or not. And again, reminiscent of 2019, when the Packers had to go on the road to face the Kansas City Chiefs, but Patrick Mahomes missed the game, and the Packers got a big win and kept things rolling there in the middle of the season. That's the way this league can work sometimes, and the Vikings are taking advantage of everything. You mentioned Cousins in the fourth quarter. I take nothing away, obviously, from what he's done. When you're in tight games, whether you're losing, tie game, you need to put together those drives. But Minnesota's defense has also come up big in the fourth quarter, time and time again. Being the better team in the fourth quarter means doing it on both sides of the ball to be able to win those close games, and that's what the Vikings are doing. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, sort of a quasi-season-saving comeback for them against the Los Angeles Rams. The Buccaneers now 4-5. Last year's Super Bowl champs now 3-5. And as we had talked last week, the game of the week in the NFL in Week 9 was the Sunday night matchup with Kansas City against Tennessee, and it turned into one of those very entertaining matchups from the standpoint of the Tennessee Titans could only run the ball and couldn't throw it. And the Kansas City Chiefs just refused to run the ball and put the whole game on Patrick Mahomes' right arm. The pass attempts versus the run attempts, for the other team, statistically one of those crazy ones, and it ends up going to overtime, and the Kansas City Chiefs pull it out. And I just wonder, from the ups and downs we've seen from the Kansas City Chiefs, if a win like that under the lights at home against a team that they've seen plenty here in recent years and got taken to the wire by them. Maybe this is where Kansas City starts to make that second half run.
Well, because they came back from basically the win condition that Tennessee looks for, which is punching you in the mouth with Derrick Henry and controlling time of possession, controlling the tempo. Titans did that, giving up 9 points in the first half, but I mean, Derrick Henry owned that game, and they came out in the second half and dictated the tempo and showed again that if you need to, you can just put this thing entirely on Patrick Mahomes and he's going to step up for you. Overall, though, I want to just mention this before we go out. The Packers are still trying to claw their way back into this, and I said they need to win a game here before we talk about anything else, but AFC did the Packers a lot of favors in this week. 0 for 4 on Sunday, the NFC was in those crossover games, including the Bears losing that shootout to the Dolphins.
Right.
So it's still all out there for Green Bay. You got to get a win. You got to rally. You're going to need to start beating some teams that nobody expects you to beat, but this is go time.
Yeah, absolutely. The Packers, as we said, two home games in 5 days, but they're probably going to be underdogs in both of them based on the 3-6 record and facing two teams that are in the playoff hunt. But we'll talk more about that matchup with the Cowboys on our next show. For now, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. Day after day, we've got everything for you. For Wes, I'm Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.